Most people think gold goes up because people get scared. That is too shallow. Gold does not make its biggest moves because investors suddenly become emotional. Gold makes its biggest moves when the monetary system becomes mathematically impossible to defend. Honestly, that is the real trigger. And if you miss that, you will spend your whole life treating gold like a mood trade when it is actually a regime change trade. That is the first thing I want you to understand. Gold is not the shiny thing people buy when the news gets dramatic. Gold is the thing money runs toward when governments run out of honest options. Those are not the same event. One is emotion, the other is arithmetic. And arithmetic always wins in the end. I have watched 3 great gold moves unfold across the last century. The details changed, the presidents changed, the slogans changed, the excuses changed, the economists changed their vocabulary. But the sequence did not change every single time. Before gold truly exploded, the same 4 signals showed up. Not 3 of them, not 2.5. Not some vague resemblance people invented later with the benefit of hindsight. All 4 debt became unpayable. The rules of money got changed. Saving in currency turned into a guaranteed loss in real terms. And then the people printing the money started buying gold themselves. That is the pattern. And right now, all 4 signals are flashing again. That is why I think most people are sleepwalking into one of the most important monetary shifts of their lives. They are still arguing about whether gold is a good inflation hedge. That is kindergarten. The real question is whether the monetary authorities are approaching the point where they can no longer protect the currency without destroying the state that depends on it. That is the adult question, and gold has always known the answer before the public does. Let me walk you through the 4 signals the same way I would explain them to someone I care about. Slowly enough to be useful, bluntly enough to matter. The first signal is the debt trap. Not big debt, not debt we should probably worry about. Not debt that looks ugly on a television chart and then gets forgotten because the stock market went up for another quarter. I mean debt that has crossed the point of repayment. That is a very different thing. A government can survive high debt for a long time if the debt remains politically financeable and mathematically serviceable. But there comes a point where the debt load is not merely large, it is terminal. If treated honestly, that is the line. That is when the game changes. Because once you cross that line, the government does not have a portfolio problem, it has a truth problem. It can either admit the promises cannot be kept under the old money, or it can keep the promises by making the money worth less. Those are the only 2 doors, default or debasement. Governments in the so-called civilized world almost never choose open default. They choose the quieter crime. They change the money. That is why gold matters so much. Gold is not just a commodity in that moment. It becomes the measuring stick for the lie. Let me show you how brutally clear this has been in history. In the 1930s, after war debts, depression, and a broken financial structure, the United States reached the point where the debt and monetary arrangement could not be preserved. Honestly, the government could not tax its way out. It could not grow its way out quickly enough. So what did it do? It changed the definition of money. It took control of gold, then revalued it upward. Overnight, the measuring stick changed, and every person sitting in dollars got poorer relative to gold. That was not an accident. That was policy. Then go forward to the 1970s. By then, America had spent beyond what its monetary promises could reasonably support. The international dollar system was straining. Foreign holders understood something was wrong. Gold kept leaving the United States because the official price was false. So what happened? The gold link broke. The old promise was suspended temporarily. They said, temporary is one of government's favorite lies. The dollar was cut loose, and gold went from $35 to $850. People still describe that move as if it were some mysterious commodity frenzy. It was not. It was debt math forcing a monetary confession. Then move forward again into the 2000s and the crisis years around 2008. The bursting of the tech bubble, war spending, credit excess, mortgage insanity, bank rescues, insurance rescues, everything got shoved onto the public balance sheet, the debt doubled, and once again the state refused to allow honest clearing. So it did what indebted systems do. It engineered a new form of monetary support, polite enough to sound technical, aggressive enough to destroy the old relationship between savings and purchasing power. Gold went from roughly $250 to $1,900. Again, people love to act like that was just fear. Number, it was debt that could not be resolved honestly. This is why the first signal matters so much. Once debt reaches the point where the state cannot realistically repay it in money of stable value, the system has already selected the direction of the next great gold move. You do not need the exact date. You do not need the exact policy memo. You just need to understand that the state now has an incentive to dilute rather than discipline. That is enough. And today, the debt numbers tell the same story. The U.S. national debt is moving toward levels that would once have been laughed out of serious conversation. Per household, it is absurd relative to income. It is absurd relative to what can ever honestly be paid down under stable money. It is absurd. And yet people still speak as if there is some future year in which the government will get serious. About what? About shrinking itself, about cutting the promises voters now treat like sacred rights, about tolerating the recession, unemployment, market collapse, and political chaos required to restore arithmetic. That is fantasy. And gold does not price fantasy, it prices what governments actually do. That is why the second signal matters. Rule changes. This is where the public always gets fooled because they are trained to think money is a natural law. It is not. Money under a state system is a legal arrangement backed by force and trust. When the state gets cornered, it rewrites the arrangement every time, sometimes crudely, sometimes elegantly, sometimes all at once, sometimes by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts. But it changes the rules. That is the second signal. And once you start watching for it, you realize how often the most important moves in monetary history are not market moves first. They are political or legal moves first. In the 1930s, the U.S. government simply criminalized the private freedom it no longer found convenient, gathered up gold, and then changed the price. That is not subtle. That is a man telling you the game changed after he collected your chips. In 1971, the game changed on television, a temporary suspension, they called it. What they meant was that the old discipline was incompatible with the new spending path, so the discipline died. Then in the post-2008 era, the rule change did not come in one dramatic speech. It came in a softer costume, quantitative easing, emergency facilities, asset purchases, liquidity operations, new acronyms for the old vice. They did not say, "We have decided the currency must absorb the losses." They said, "We are acting to preserve financial stability." Different language, same direction. And right now, once again, the rules are changing. Not in one famous Sunday speech, not with one clean confession through multiple channels at once. That is what makes it so dangerous, because the more complicated the rule change, the easier it is for ordinary people to miss it. A lot of them still think monetary debasement requires a president on television or a central banker admitting panic. It does not. It can happen through regulation. It can happen through bank balance sheet relief. It can happen through the backdoor use of new financial structures to create artificial demand for state debt. It can happen through crypto policy. It can happen through stablecoin rules. It can happen through the quiet conscription of new technology into the old deficit machine. That is what people are not fully grasping. If you require new digital dollars to be backed by government debt, you are not modernizing finance. You are drafting the crypto system into the treasury market. You are manufacturing demand for state paper through rule design. That is a monetary rule change. It is not the only one. It is one of several. And when I see a debt trap plus active rule changes, I do not ask whether gold is interesting. I ask whether the monetary authorities are once again trying to buy time by altering the relationship between paper claims and reality. That is a much better question. Now we come to the third signal, negative real returns. This is the one that hits ordinary people in the ribs because it attacks their sense of virtue. Most people still believe saving cash is responsible. They still believe putting money in the bank is discipline. They still believe that if their balance goes up, they are doing the right thing. This is how the system robs them. Not with violence, with manners. Your bank statement says you earn 2%, maybe 3%. If you are lucky, maybe a little more. And so you feel good, you feel prudent, you feel like the adult in the room while everybody else is speculating. Then life reminds you that groceries, insurance, rent, health care, transport, utilities, school fees, travel, maintenance, and the actual lived experience of being a person in the world have all gone up faster than the bank paid you. That means you did not earn. You lost. You just lost quietly. That is what negative real rates are. The state is telling you that if you lend your money to the system or keep your savings inside it, you will get back fewer life units later than you surrendered today, and it does this while praising your prudence. That is why I say negative real rates are not merely a policy outcome. They are a transfer mechanism. They transfer purchasing power from savers to debtors and from ordinary people to owners of scarce assets. That is the hidden tax. And every major gold move has happened in an environment where enough people eventually realized this. After Nixon broke the old discipline, inflation exploded while ordinary savers got destroyed. In the aftermath of 2008, rates were crushed so low that savers were effectively told to accept vapor returns while asset owners got the benefit of reflation. And today we are back in the same neighborhood. The official stories have changed. The mechanism has not. When inflation remains structurally high enough and short, term-safe instruments do not actually preserve real purchasing power. The system begins pushing capital out of paper and into real assets. That is the third signal. You do not need a PhD to understand it. You only need to ask one brutal question. Does my money buy more life after a year of safe saving or less? If the answer is less, then the monetary system is already selecting winners and losers, and the winners are almost never the people holding cash. This is why I tell people that cash is not neutral in a period like this. It is a position, and it is usually the wrong one once the third signal is flashing. Now, the fourth signal is my favorite because it is the most revealing. Central banks buy gold. Think about the absurdity of this for a moment. The institutions that create paper money then use some of that paper to buy gold. The very people entrusted to manage faith in the currency are quietly exchanging pieces of that currency for the asset that sits outside their own printing press. If that is not a signal, then language has no meaning. Before 1971, foreign governments were already draining us gold because they understood the dollar promise was too generous relative to the metal behind it. They saw the imbalance before the public did. After the global financial crisis, central banks flipped from being net sellers of gold to net buyers. That was not decoration. That was an institutional vote of no confidence in the long-run value of paper reserves. And now we are in the most aggressive central bank gold buying cycle of the modern era. Year after year, central banks have kept buying, not retail traders, not gold bugs in basements, the managers of national reserves, Poland, China, India, Turkey, Kazakhstan, Czech Republic, a whole list of states that apparently have less faith in paper diversification than the average financial advisor with a PowerPoint that matters. Because central banks are not buying gold for fun. They are not buying it because Winston the Golden Retriever likes shiny things. They are buying it because they understand what happens when debt politics and the reserve system begin grinding against one another too hard. They know paper promises are political objects. Gold is not. That is why this fourth signal is so powerful. It confirms that the insiders responsible for managing the system are not fully trusting the system. And when the managers of the paper are buying metal, I listen. Now let me line the whole sequence up for you again, because this is where most people finally see it. Signal 1, debt moves past repayment, not past comfort, past honesty. Signal 2, the rules of money get changed, sometimes openly, sometimes through back doors. Signal 3, saving in paper becomes a guaranteed negative real return. Your statement rises, your life shrinks. Signal 4, central banks buy gold. The printers hedge themselves against their own product. That is the pattern. That is the pattern that preceded the 3 great gold explosions of the last century. And today all 4 are on the table again. Now, I want to say something important because a lot of people ruin themselves even when their thesis is correct. Gold is not a get-rich-by-Friday trade. This is not meme stock nonsense. It is not a two-week lottery ticket. The 1970s bull market in gold took years. Even inside it, the price got ripped apart more than once. At one point, gold fell almost 50% in the middle of that great bull market. That matters because conviction without risk management is just ego wearing a tie. A lot of people see a big macro thesis and then turn it into a religion. That is stupid. You do not have to become a disciple to benefit from a trend. You just need a framework. And my framework has always been simple. Gold is part of a portfolio, not the whole religion of a portfolio. Stocks still matter. Real estate still matters when the right conditions exist. Cash has a role for optionality and sleep, and metals matter most. When the four signals line up and the system begins doing what indebted systems always do, that is where we are now. So how do I think about positioning not with all in emotion? With layers, you can own physical metal, if that is your preference and jurisdiction permits it sensibly. You can own an ETF if simplicity matters more than custody. You can own miners if you understand the risk and want operational leverage to the gold price. That last one is important because miners are not gold, they are businesses. That means more upside and more danger. If gold rises 25%, a miner's profits can rise by more because its cost base may not rise at the same pace. That leverage is attractive. It is also not free. You are taking operating risk, jurisdiction risk, management risk, and market risk in exchange for that leverage. So once again, framework beats enthusiasm. This is the boring truth people hate hearing. Position sizing matters more than conviction. Risk management matters more than conviction. Diversification matters more than conviction. Conviction is easy to perform online. Risk management is what keeps you alive long enough to profit. So if you ask me where we are now, I would say we are not at the end of this move. We are at the point where the four signals have lined up clearly enough that the big picture is no longer hard to see, but not so late that the whole world has fully repositioned. That is a sweet spot, not because it guarantees anything, because it gives you a framework before the crowd turns the move into a social craze. And that is always where the better money is made. Not when the magazine cover arrives before. Let me give you the cleanest summary I can. Gold does not explode because people suddenly get nervous. Gold explodes when the state can no longer reconcile its debts, its promises, and its currency. Honestly, then it changes the rules. Then it robs savers through negative real returns. Then the central banks themselves begin voting against paper with their own reserve purchases. That is the sequence. That is the sequence that turned $35 into $850. That is the sequence that turned $250 into $1,900. That is the sequence that turned roughly $1,050 into nearly $4,800. And if you think the current debt, current rule changes, current real rate destruction, and current central bank behavior are somehow unrelated, then you are not studying history. You are hiding from it. I do not hide from patterns. I respect them, especially when they repeat across generations, especially when they involve governments, because governments never default until they do something worse. They make the money worth less. Gold has always understood that. Now the only question is whether you do too.